Hey, welcome into Husker247 Daily, fresh off of our hiatus at the end of last week. I'm Mike Shaver, joined by Michael Brunts. Again, apologies for those that have become regular viewers, listeners. We had a few technical snafus the end of last week, weren't able to get episodes up for Thursday and for Friday, but we should be beyond that, Brunts, and we move forward, just like Nebraska moves forward at 6-2, coming off of a 28-21 win against Northwestern. And inside of that win, I know it wasn't his most yards, and you could argue that he was maybe even more valuable against Cincinnati, but I feel like maybe this was the most important Emmett Johnson game in some ways. Is that too hot of a take? Is that a tepid take? Is that an obvious take? What's Michael Brunt say?
No, I think it's an okay take. He
Okay,
was my pick to click last week.
there we go.
Just pointing that out. But no, it was
Would you say he clicked?
he clicked. I think at some point during that game I leaned over to you and said it almost felt like the game that I always think of this most, and he did it a lot during his career, but Amir Abdullah used to basically kind of wallpaper over some blocking in front of him that wasn't always the best.
You turned some negative yardage runs into like 25-yard runs, yes.
The 2014 game against Miami is probably the one that comes to mind most, where he was doing a lot of work, just getting back to the line of scrimmage and doing something with it after that fact. I felt like in that game against Northwestern, Emmett Johnson was, I mean, he does it with regularity, but I thought that was the game where most it was like, okay, got to make a guy miss two yards deep behind the line of scrimmage and then get something upfield. He's done that a number of times, but yeah, he was great. Pass protection was a lot better from him. I don't think Northwestern really forced the issue a ton with pressure, but the pass blocking was much better than it was against Minnesota, and it needed to be. But yeah, I would say that was probably Emmett's best game, and he had some decent ones towards the end of last season, but they needed to ride him. They were going to dedicate themselves to running the ball, and he was up to the task. So you can't quibble much when he's number 5 in the country in rush yards, top 10 at least, and Nebraska's barely in the top 100 for rushing offense after you take out sack adjusted yardage. Like, that's kind of wild.
Yeah, it is it's kind of hard to square because you look around the country and you see these teams that are putting up like massive rushing totals. I don't know if this is something that you've noticed this year, and maybe I just do whenever I do the how Nebraska's opponent fared thing. There's a lot of teams that have put up like 260 or more yards on Big Ten teams in running the ball this year. And obviously that's happened in Nebraska a couple times with Minnesota and with Michigan, but it is a deal where it feels like most teams aren't very good about stopping the run, which feels like a tackling thing at this point. I was surprised by how Northwestern played Nebraska on Saturday. They didn't really, as you said, they didn't force the issue with pressure on Dylan Raiola. They didn't really bring like 7-8 men looks in the box a ton either. They weren't like stunting and going for big run blitzes. It felt like they were like, hey, we're just going to play our base defense straight up against Nebraska. And Nebraska handled it relatively easily. I know they only scored 21 points on offense. 7 points came from Kenneth Williams on that touchdown run. They had the missed field goal. They had a drive that should have been a first down that they were forced to punt off of because of a poor spot. But really, the offense, they just didn't possess the ball that much to do a lot with it, which is its own conversation. But I I thought, Nebraska and Emmett Johnson, that version of Nebraska's offense could work, as they try to finish out this run against Big Ten teams here, starting with USC this weekend. I mean, I don't know. You're going to need a lot more running game against USC, and you're probably going to need more than 28 points. But I I think they're going to be able to run on all of the rest of the teams on their schedule. Like, it's not the same Iowa defense that we've become accustomed to. Now, can Nebraska mitigate the sacks and the negative yardage plays that way? That'll be the big question.
If I told you that Iowa was number 4 in the country against the run right now, would you believe that?
Only because teams are passing so much against them because
Yeah.
their defense has been that bad and they don't get pressure on it. But I really don't think like I don't think this Iowa defense is what we have seen from them before, and I think Nebraska will be able to run on them. We just went through this with Northwestern, where their defense was supposed to be able to slow Nebraska down, and that first drive told you right away that they weren't going to have as many issues with it.
Yeah, it's interesting that, spinning it to this week, like it almost feels like in some ways Nebraska is going to have to play the type of game plan that like Minnesota would play, where you're trying to control the pace, you're trying to, probably a lower possession game benefits Nebraska in some ways. Sure, it's a test of efficiency, but this version of USC is not one that I would want to get into a track meet with, I don't think.
No.
So that's where, it's going to be another week of Emmett Johnson, and it's an interesting USC team, because I think the perception, just because it's USC, is that they're not good up front. And I don't know if Nebraska somehow broke Michigan, but I was really surprised by how USC really kind of pushed Michigan around in that game after they played Nebraska. It was later in the season, but it feels like USC is a little bit better, a little bit more athletic up front than what they have been. So, but no, I mean, Emmett Johnson, I mean, when you went into the season and there were question marks about how much depth Nebraska had at running back, and there's still those questions, it was going to be, okay, a lot's going to be on Emmett. And, he's held up really well this year. And it feels like there's still even more for him as a receiver, I think. I think a lot of his catches have kind of been, dump offs and check downs and stuff like that, rather than just design pass plays that I think he's pretty good at too.
Yeah, they had a design pass play for him. Matt McMaster and I talked about it on the Sunday side session. And I would say Brunt, too, is maybe the best play of the game for Emmett Johnson, in a game in which he had a lot of great plays. But if you recall that last drive for Nebraska to go score the touchdown on the first third down, they go to an empty set. He flexes out to the near side and just runs a curl. And it was clear he was the top option. As soon as they got the look that they wanted, they knew the coverage was going to be a little bit off. He hit them. They got the first down. I mean, it's simple. It was like a 9-yard, 8-yard play. It's nothing that stands out when you just pour over the plays and all of it. But Nebraska had to absolutely have it. And I thought it was notable that on a drive which they hit on 4 third downs in a row, it started with that one to Emmett Johnson before you got to Isaiah Hunter, before you got to Dane Key, before you got to Ja'Cory Barney. So his ability to help in different ways makes him stand out even more.
Yeah. All right. I promised you a random recruiting question to wrap it up here. I've got one for you. Brian Kelly made the walk of shame out to the car last night and drove away from LSU.
Was there extra video footage of it?
Yeah, there was.
Was he wearing a sweater like Bob Diaco in November of 2017?
I couldn't tell if there was any Argyle. It was from a distance, but you saw him get into the car and drive away. Are we, with these coaching changes happening earlier and earlier, is there like a new kind of window in the recruiting calendar where it's like, let's go back and pick over everybody's commits who's lost a head coach? Is that where we are now in the recruiting cycle?
Yeah, I mean, if you have, what did I see? They had 10 coaches fired before November. I mean, so let's say conservatively, on average, those 10 classes have like 9 people, which is probably low.
Yes.
That's 90 available players that are committed to a program that don't have a head coach. The head coach would have to be announced almost right around the time that they're going to be signing with that program. So then you have people that are recruiting on behalf of them that can't really tell them what the future looks like, what the offense is that they're going to run, who the coach is going to be, whether the person even talking with them is still going to be there. So it's kind of hard to sell that. And then you also have it to where you have these programs that are Florida, LSU, Penn State. There's a big difference between looking over the Oklahoma State and the USF, or excuse me, USF. I'm trying to think of who the other. There's another team in there that has fired a coach, but looking at some of these programs, like they won't have as much talent that you're going to be interested in. But Nebraska was on the phone working on some LSU guys as of yesterday. They've been working on Penn State targets. We know there were some Florida guys that they like. So then if they hadn't visited you already in the summer, they can come out for a paid official visit here. Nebraska's got the USC game. They're going to have the Iowa game. Both of those are going to have official visits at them. So it's a good opportunity for Nebraska. And Nebraska's in their own situation with what happens with Matt Rule, but at the same time, they're in a much stronger position to be adding talent than any of these programs without a head coach. So it's kind of a different sort of carve out in the recruiting cycle, if you would. And you're going to see a lot of movement. We saw it here this morning on Monday. A guy that Nebraska would have loved to have, Jashir Rogers, just flipped from Penn State to Oklahoma. And you're going to see more and more of that, I think, as we go forward.
Plenty to and I mean, USC game is going to be a huge one recruiting wise for Nebraska. So
yeah, they're going to have a lot of talent and we'll maybe dive into that here later this week and go through some of the people that are going to be here in town for this game as Nebraska takes on USC on Saturday under the lights, the blackout game, the black jerseys, the 6:30 kick. It should be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of fun leading up to it here at Husker247. Get over to Husker247.com. Plenty of coverage from that win against Northwestern. Plenty of lead up to that USC game. Recruiting. Basketball is going to get underway here in about a week. I'm sure Bruns has some baseball stuff just floating around in his brain that he could be dropping on the board at any time. You never know. That's the thing with Nebraska athletics. That's the thing with Husker247.com. Go there. Learn something you didn't know before. That's what we're going to do for you. Be sure to check out the latest editions of Husker 24/7 Daily. We'll be back with another Husker 24/7 podcast and, of course, the Husker 24/7 Hypecast later this week.